Okay, Jules, this morning we're going to be doing the procedure for priming for Pandomo. This is an ultra-fine primer. It's the only one that we use with any of the Earth Code range. Ultra-fine primer. Okay, it's white. We don't have to tint it. It also comes in 1s, 5s, and 20s. Okay. The reason why we use a ultra-fine primer is because if we used anything heavier than this, it would show through the Pandomo because it's so thin. So the most important thing to remember when you're selling this product, if people say, oh, well, we can just use a fine or a coarse aggregate primer, not possible. This is the only primer that you use for Pandomo. The ultrafine primer, once again, comes in the generic pack, white with a black label, because both products belong to both stables. You can use them in the Earth Code stable and the Midas stable. Okay, it's applied with, Jules?
What we've got here is a classic Lambsdale roller.
Okay.
And it's 75mm utility Hamilton's brush.
Okay, great. Okay, as you'll see with Jules, he'll give it a good shake. Like obviously, if it's 20 litre, you're going to have to be Samson to do that. So you use your Festo drill or give it a quick stir. Okay, but the 5 litre you can just pick up and juggle. As I've said before, quite difficult to open these 5 litre cans, but with a scraper, pretty easy to do. Okay, pour it into the clean bucket. Remember, clean bucket, not dirty bucket. Those little tips, make sure it doesn't drip down the side of the bucket and waste the stuff all over the floor. Okay, then you can see everything's been taped off nice and neatly, so we won't go and dirty the skirtings if we drop anything on top of that. He can purely just take it off when he's finished. Some people think they can get away with cutting here, but believe you me, if you actually drop something on top of this plastic skirting, you're going to have to sand it and destroy it, and then you've got all sorts of problems. So just take time out to put your tape on there. And if you had any plugs, you remove the plug place. I hate this thing where people try and paint around the plug. Yeah. You start messing paint on the plug, so you take it off. If you had any cornices, masking tape up, because you can imagine, if we drop something on the skirting and it was an oil-based paint or whatever kind of paint, you now sand it to take it off, you damage that. To replace that kind of skirting is going to cost a lot more than a little roll of masking tape. Okay, Jules, over to you. Okay, he hooks it into his nice hook over there to make sure his bucket doesn't fall off. Cutting in with his 75mm Hamilton's brush. As I said, with the Pandomo, you don't have to tint your primer. It's white, and it's got a fine, fine texture in it. And why the texture? Because we want the Pandomo to grip on it when we put it on. This is also a water-based product, Jules?
Yes, it is.
And what kind of spread do you reckon we'll get?
You'll get about 6 to 8 squares with the ultrafine primer.
With the ultrafine primer. And once again, if we have a rough wall,
that's correct.
It's probably going to use less. Yeah. All we're trying to do is cover the wall with enough of the product so we're going to get good grip when we put the Pandomo on. Now, generally, how long does it take to dry before we can put anything on?
Well, under normal conditions, you usually leave it for 4 hours drying time.
Yeah.
But in very extreme warm conditions, it might take a bit quicker.
Yeah. And in cold conditions?
In cold, it doubles the drying time.
So the best is to just leave it overnight?
Yeah.
So prime all your walls day one and start your first coat of Pandomo the next day. You can see over here now when cutting in, because he's masking taped up his skirting, how quickly and easy it is for him to cut in. If you didn't have masking tape, that paint would be going all over the skirting. So it's essential that one actually applies protection to anything that you're cutting into. Okay, Jules, let's just recap again. Okay, so the most important things to remember about before priming, always tape up your skirtings, remove your plugs, make sure that you'd have drop sheets if it's necessary. Obviously, in this environment over here, we don't have to have drop sheets because we've got a raw screeded floor. We get about 6 to 8 square meters per liter. We get about a 4 to 6 hour drying time, but the best is to probably leave it overnight. Okay, Jules, we've applied our fine, ultra-fine aggregate primer here.
That's correct, yes.
The only one in the Earth Code stable where we use ultra-fine. It's been drying for at least 4 to 6 hours. We've taped off the panel that we want to do. The Pandomo comes in 20-litre buckets, 5-litre buckets, and sampling in 1-litre buckets. It comes in a standard 20 colors. What do you reckon approximate sped rates per coat in this product?
It's about 1 square per liter.
1 square litre for 2 coats.
2 coats.
Okay, so 1 bucket should do you at least 40 square meters.
Yeah.
1 coat.
Even 1 coat.
1 coat, okay. 2 coats, 20 square meters. It's a lime-based product. It doesn't like being applied in the cold weather because the lime tends to bloom through and whiten the product. So it's very important that you check out your temperature before applying this. The darker the color, the more you'll see the lime burn through it. Applied by a steel trowel and then allowed to dry and then flattened off. The nice thing about this product, there's no mixing. It's straight out the bucket and onto the walls. One thing you've noticed immediately with this product, it's a lot easier to apply, Julian. I mean, it's not all the stuff that you have with pigmented plaster. You can just take it straight out the bucket. It's applied incredibly thin, hence the reason why we use this very fine aggregate primer. If we had the coarse aggregate primer, it'd be showing through everywhere. One mustn't worry about these shiny spots over here because when you do the second coat exactly the same way as you're doing the first coat now, it'll cover that up. But these kind of things, what we're going to try and do, you've got to try and get it as smooth as possible. Otherwise, you will see these things accentuate everywhere. So the thing to do is to make it as smooth as possible. So to remember, most important thing is that you must bring it as smooth as possible, not leave it thick on the wall. And as I said before, what will happen now is that Julian will go in and do the bottom section whilst Mohammed is finishing off the top section. The skill level that you need is not as you would for pigmented plaster or stucco, but the one thing that you have to try is to try and get your trowel marks as low as that. These highly excessive trowel marks over here must be pushed flat as possible because those will show. Because what happens once this is dry is that tomorrow morning we're going to sand this panel down again, and then we're going to do exactly the same procedure as we've got, as you've seen today. And then sand again when that is dry and apply 2 coats of wax. So it's imperative that you get this as flat as possible. Okay, one of the most important things is what you're seeing now. It's the attention to detail, making sure that you get it as flat as possible. So they put it on very quickly, but they spend most of their time trying to get it as flat as possible because, as I said, it makes your second coat so much more easier and it makes the appearance of the product far more sophisticated. If one just left it like it is now, it tends to turn into a very, very rustic, heavy movement product. Okay, what they're doing now is as the product is being worked, it's stiffening up and you're getting your smoother finish. So you have to keep on working until it starts stiffening up. The other thing that's very important with this Pandomo is that you cannot apply it more than 1 millimeter thick. Otherwise, it tends to mud crack. Mud cracking being it shrinks and you get fine hairline cracks in it. So you cannot do it in a 1-coat application. It has to be done in 2 coats. But what they're doing now, as I said, is just slowly polishing it it starts stiffening up and they're getting it to that smooth finish that we require. Okay, Jules, that's our first coat completed. Just to recap, the primer is?
Ultra-fine primer.
Ultra-fine primer, 4 to 6 square meters per liter. We apply our first coat of Pandomo at approximately 20 square meters for your first coat. It's applied by steel trowel. It can be applied by roller first if you want to, if you're less skilled with using a trowel and then work with a trowel. But most skilled applicators will use it straight onto the wall with a trowel and flatten it off as you've seen them working it. The trick being to actually work it until it stiffens up and flatten it off as smooth as possible. These fine small ridges you will see, they'll be sanded down tomorrow morning and we'll put on the second coat as we've done the first coat. It's a water-based product, so you can clean your tools with water. It's not necessary to, like all the other products, once they mix, throw them away. You can purely put your lid on and carry on the next day. That's what makes Pandomo probably one of the easiest trowel-on coatings to do. Okay, so we've allowed the first coat of Pandomo to dry overnight. You can see the fine trowel marks that we've got from the first coat. As I said to you, we've got to try and get it as smooth as possible. These white areas that you see will be sanded off. That's the lime that's burning through the first substrate, and that's what creates the movement. So what's going to happen now is that Julian and Mohammed are going to first, before they put the second coat on, sand with an 80 grit sandpaper to take off these heavy lines over here. And once those are off, they'll proceed with moisturing the actual substrate. Then they'll apply the second coat. Now there are two ways, or styles, shall we say, of applying Pandomo. You get a very rough movement, or you get a very subtle movement. We've decided today to show you the more subtle movement. So I'll leave it over to you guys. It's going to be sanding, moisturizing, and then applying the final coats of stucco. All they're really doing with this first coat, they're not trying to get it perfect, you're just trying to take off the high spots here. That's really all you're doing.
As you can feel it.
Yeah, and it's creating a little bit of a key for you. So that 80 grit sandpaper, you can see actually if you come up really close here, there are fine scratches in here. Your second coat will cover that. So it's creating a key and taking away these high spots. So please make sure that all guys sanding have masks. Once again, this can be done with an orbital sander with the same 80 grit sandpaper on. You'll just find that with a hand you can get into areas where an orbital won't. But we would suggest if you're doing big walls, an orbital sander would probably be the better thing. But for the sake of this panel, orbital sanders are a bit of an overkill. Okay guys, thank you very much. Now what's going to happen is they're going to take off the dust, brush away the dust from the skirtings, apply moisture to the wall. This is a nice sanded keyed surface. What they're going to do now is they're going to apply some moisture to it and they're going to start applying the final coat of Pandomo. Okay, so what they've done now is pure clean water. The nice thing about putting the water on too, it takes off that last little bit of dust that you didn't get. So it settles the whole substrate down, it evens the suction, and they can now apply the final coat of Pandomo. They can work a lot longer with it and get a nice, much better finish than if you just left it completely dry. Okay, we've now got the first coat nice and wet to apply our second coat. The only difference between the first and second coat is that when you apply your second coat, you're going to get a better spread rate than the first coat, because the second coat obviously doesn't have to fill up all the imperfections on the wall. So you'll find that they'll work it exactly the same manner, and they'll work it off now to the final smoothest finish possible that they can do. You'll see what's happening here as they're polishing. Because the water that they put on the first coat has allowed them to work it, and they're starting to get a very, very smooth finish. And that's what they're trying to get across the whole surface. So they'll keep on working it, and this is what's allowing them to actually work it as long as they can, because they wet the wall down. If they hadn't done that, this product would be almost dry by now, and you wouldn't be able to get this smooth finish. But over here is what we're trying to achieve on the whole area. So it's imperative that if you are going to get a very subtle movement, that you do wet your walls and you apply it and come back and polish as they're doing it now. And as you can see now, Julian, this is the final coat.
That's correct, yes.
I've got some fine lines over here which you'll sand off tomorrow morning when it's dry. So we leave this thing for 6 to 8 hours to dry, and then we'll start the final procedure of waxing and giving it its final beautiful finish.
Yes.
Okay, Julian, we've completed the second coat of Pandomo, allowed it to dry overnight. Looking pretty good. These lines now, what we'll sand with is a
320 grit sandpaper, water sandpaper.
Okay, and give it a light sand, take off all the high spots, and then 2 coats of wax. Now, once again, the sealing process for Pandomo, generally in most areas, is just 2 coats of conventional wall wax.
That's correct.
But if you wanted a more high-wearing surface, we put on a coat of color-retaining primer, and then put the wax on top of that to get the luster, or 2 coats of water-based acrythane, and then the wax on top of that, purely to serve as a barrier for water. So we'll just, for the sake of this demonstration, we'll put on 2 coats of wall wax. So it's over to you, Julian. Okay, Jill, so we've got this fine, sort of consistent, powdery finish over the top of the surface. What he's going to do now is just take his mutton cloth, take off the surface dust, and proceed immediately with your wall wax. Okay, you can see what's happening now. He's just taking this fine, fine residue of dust off the top there. That's the dusted surface, and this is where the dust's still sitting on the top of my hand over here. Over here, hardly anything. Okay, so what you can see is happening here is the wax is picking up all little nuances of the Pandomo. This is the first coat. It's sinking into the Pandomo. And as soon as he's finished this, he'll go back and do exactly the same. So this first coat is more of a sealer coat. The second coat he applies on top of this directly after he's finished this coat, and then he'll polish and buff it up with a new mutton cloth. Okay, so now what you can see, if you rub your hand over it, it's actually quite sticky because it's obviously still drying. You can see how beautiful it's starting to pick up all the nuances. This wax is still drying and it'll slowly dry. In fact, it's almost dry over here. Hey, Jules, there it's still wet.
Yeah, still wet, all these darker patches.
So you don't have to wait. We start straight away again,
Yeah.
applying the final coat of wax, and then you'll polish it up with a clean mutton cloth. Okay, so Julian's completed putting his second coat of wax on. We've got a nice thick film on top of the Pandomo for your protection. You've noticed that he changes the rag all the time because you see that it really builds up on there, and if you just kept on applying it, you get this real greasy patch all over the wall. So we get rid of this. What I normally do with these is give them a good wash and hang them out on the washing line to dry, and you can use it again for putting wax on. The polishing rag is brand new, clean mutton cloth. You only use it for polishing. Obviously, if this is a large area, you'd be using orbital discs with a Lansell buffing pad on. But for the sake of this, this is perfectly good. Okay, you can see what Julian's done there. This area here has been polished. All the last nuances, the veins and everything are really highlighted from the wax. Here it's still pretty dull, but the motion is just that circular motion to polish it up. He's always looking and seeing where he's missed spots. So it's very important to stand back and just see where you've missed. And it's just a matter of polishing and polishing. Okay, you can see that Julian has been very thorough in his polishing. He's taken a lot of time. He's really polished up to get this beautiful luster and look. Now, let's just recap the sealing process, Julian. The first thing that we did was sand it down with a 320 grit sandpaper.
Yes, we did.
Dusted off all the dust.
Yeah.
Then applied one coat of wall wax as a sort of sinking in first coat. Then immediately after we've completed that wall, we applied the second coat. And then immediately after applying the second coat, you then used a clean mutton cloth purely to polish it up and give it this beautiful sheen. And you'll notice there's hardly any wax on here compared to the initial coat that we put on, the application. So there's one cloth for applying the wax, yes, and another cloth for polishing the wax. Thanks very much, Julian. So this is Pandomo completed. We've watched the whole process go ahead. As we know, it comes in 16 standard colors. Now, the best places to use Pandomo are in your lounge, in general areas around the home. If you are going to use it in your bathroom, if you are going to use it in areas with high traffic, I suggest that you use the correct sealing system. What we've got on here was 2 coats of conventional wax. But if you were going to use this product in a bathroom, we'd use 1 coat of color retaining primer and 2 coats of water-based acrythane, either in a matte or a gloss. As I said, it comes in 16 standard colors, comes in a 20-liter tin. You can tint it to the color that you want, so it's not necessary to carry stock of each color on your floor. And that's about it with this beautiful product.